These gigantic structures are the cooling towers for reactors 5 and 6 at the Chernobyl NPP. They were built as part of a planned expansion of the facility. Construction of these reactors began in the early 1980s, but was halted following the explosion and subsequent disaster at Reactor 4 in 1986. Cooling towers are commonly used in thermal and nuclear power plants to cool large amounts of water using atmospheric airflow. Water used to reduce heat generated by the nuclear reaction must be cooled to prevent the fuel from overheating and causing a meltdown. Coolant water is pumped through the reactor to a heat exchanger, where the heat is transferred to a separate water circuit flowing to the cooling tower. The hot water is sprayed into the tower and exposed to the air, which cools the water through evaporation. Cooled water is then reused in the heat exchanger, repeating the process, while warm air from the cooling tower is released into the atmosphere. The towers are 150 meters tall and 126 meters in diameter. They're made of reinforced concrete. Unit 5 and its tower were still under construction in 1986 when the disaster occurred, halting all work. Priorities later shifted to constructing the shelter for the destroyed Unit 4, and the new reactors and towers were abandoned. Nowadays, the Chernobyl towers and their artificial islands surrounded by a channel are a popular tourist attraction. On the 30th anniversary of the disaster, an Australian artist painted a mural inside the 110-meter tower, using a 1986 photograph by photojournalist Igor Kostin. The Chernobyl NPP shelter structure, also known as the sarcophagus, is a large concrete and steel dome that covers the damaged Reactor 4 building. The sarcophagus was built to contain radioactive materials following the 1986 disaster and to protect the environment from further contamination. However, due to deterioration, a new structure called the New Safe Confinement was built and completed in 2016. The sarcophagus contained 200 tons of radioactive corium, 30 tons of dangerously contaminated dust, and 16 tons of uranium and plutonium. The Russian name for the structure, Objekt Ukryte, means covering. The design of the original sarcophagus started on May 20, 1986. Construction took 206 days and involved 8 stages, including clearing the area and laying concrete around Reactor 4. Erecting protective walls, covering the turbine hull, and installing a ventilation system. The construction used over 400,000 cubic meters of concrete and 7,300 tons of metal framework. It resulted in the enclosure of 740,000 cubic meters of heavily contaminated debris and soil. The New Safe Confinement, also known as the New Shelter or ORCA, is a structure erected in 2016 at the Chernobyl NPP. It also covers the temporary shelter sarcophagus that was built shortly after the disaster. The main objective of the New Safe Confinement is to protect the reactor from external elements, facilitate its decommission, and keep water from seeping in. It's a major project that forms part of the Shelter Implementation Plan, which is supported by the Chernobyl Shelter Fund. Its goal is to contain the radioactive remains for a minimum of 100 years, and to dismantle the original sarcophagus that was hastily built by the liquidators. The structure was designed and constructed by the French consortium Novaka, along with Vinci Construction Grants Projets and Bouygues Travaux Publics. Funding was sourced from the Chernobyl Shelter Fund, overseen by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD. 46 countries and organizations contributed to the fund, including the EBRD itself. The cost of the New Safe Confinement exceeded 2 billion euros. Train cars like this one were used to transport irradiated meat after the disaster. During the liquidation of the Chernobyl site, all livestock and wild animals within the exclusion zone were culled to prevent the spread of radioactive meat. When irradiated meat appeared in Moscow stores, the Soviet health minister raised the alarm and halted sales of meat from the exclusion zone. However, the Moscow party bosses ensured their own supply was safe to eat. In the Soviet Union of 1986, meat was still not accessible or affordable for common folk. Beef was especially scarce. The idea of throwing away thousands of tons of expensive food was something party bosses disliked. A protocol was developed to cleanse the meat of radioactivity to make it edible. Processing plants were instructed to soak the meat in chemically treated water, then check radioactivity levels. It didn't help that the plants had to expedite the process due to the huge surplus of meat. This resulted in inaccurate assessments of radioactivity and the mixing of safe and highly irradiated meat. In 1987, over 300 tons of frozen meat was shipped to the Georgian Socialist Republic, but was rejected after being tested by a dosimetrist. The meat was then loaded on a train and caused fear and panic wherever it traveled. The local authorities in Ovruch asked for the meat to be buried, but their request was rejected. The train was then sent to the Ukrainian village of Polotsk, pasted with warning signs and locked up. The radioactive meat remained there until the generator for the refrigeration failed, and the local electricians refused to repair it.
The issue was brought to the public's attention by reporters who took photos of the radioactive train.
KGB agents eventually buried the meat in South Belarus in a concrete-lined pit. In 1987, over 300 tons of frozen meat was shipped to the Georgian Socialist Republic, but was rejected after being tested by a dosimetrist. The meat was then loaded on a train and caused fear and panic wherever it traveled. The local authorities in Ovruch asked for the meat to be buried, but their request was rejected. The train was then sent to the Ukrainian village of Polotsk, pasted with warning signs and locked up. The radioactive meat remained there until the generator for
the issue was brought to the public's attention by
KGB agents eventually